Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Renzi, and I have the honor of serving as the coordinator of social studies in Maryland, at the Maryland State Department of Education. Our vision is that social studies in Maryland will produce students with the knowledge and skills necessary to be empowered, informed, and socially responsible participants in our nation's democracy. Our mission is that the Maryland State Department of Education will build capacity for high quality social studies teaching and learning in all grade levels by providing leadership, guidance, and support to local school systems. So basically, I serve the 24 districts in realizing our mission. Before I introduce our roundtable participants, I'd like to introduce you to how that mission and the code of regulations influences our work at the state agency. There's so much going on here in Maryland that is really great, and I'm eager to have them share it with you. Marissa, if you could please advance the slides. Thanks. Perfect, so we're going there. So before we can have a fruitful conversation, it's important that we go over just some basic vocabulary about state agency work and how that influences the locals. The expectations for what is taught in social studies are defined by state standards, state frameworks, and local curriculum. So state standards must be reviewed every 8 years according to COMAR. Next. And in 2015, the State Board of Ed adopted much of the C3 framework into our standard 6.0 skills and processes. Next. So in short, this means that inquiry-based instruction is the expected instructional model for social studies. Students wrestle with compelling questions, they utilize disciplinary tools and literacies to gather and evaluate sources, they develop claims using evidence, and they take informed action. Here you kind of see, if you were able to catch Dr. King's remarks just a few moments ago in the opening session, it's not just about learning the tools of civic content learning, but also the civic dispositions and actions associated with them. Next. In 2020, the state standards in social studies were revised and placed inquiry at the center of each content standard. So if you look with me for a second at the civic standards, it now reads that students will inquire about the historical development of the fundamental concepts and processes of authority, power, and influence, with particular emphasis on civic reasoning in order to become informed, responsible citizens, engage in the political process, and contribute to society. Next. So here's an example of a state framework. You can see that you've got essential questions along with indicators and objectives. And at the state level, we view these as the floor of learning expectations. The local curriculum determines that ceiling, the heights that the expectations. So in this particular example, this elementary example, you'll also notice that we include ELA, reading, writing, and speaking and listening standards into the social studies state framework. Abundant research has shown that literacy skills for both social studies and reading are best learned when done in an integrated model. So learning these skills for reading, writing, and speaking and listening through social studies on the elementary grade levels. Next. Here's an example of a high school state framework, and this is the American government framework. You'll notice here that in the far right column, it includes assessment limits. And that's true for the 2 courses in our state that have statewide assessments associated with them. Click. Next. In 2017, the Maryland General Assembly amended Maryland Education Article 7-203, Education Accountability Program. The amendment called for the creation of a middle school grade band assessment in social studies and for revisions in the American government assessment. And specifically, you'll see there in red, it calls for performance-based tasks that require students to utilize critical and historical thinking skills and analyze primary sources. The assessment limits you just saw on the previous slide with the American government framework define the limits of the content and skills on that statewide assessment. Next. So Maryland's only one of 10 states that require full credit, a full year of American government as a course requirement for graduation. And this slide shows the importance of the pipeline of social studies learning, as well as the framework revisions that started in 2015. The red stars indicate the 2 state assessed courses. So it all starts in pre-K when students first hit our classroom doors. It is at that point that we begin to foster their development into engaged civic participants, developing their voice and agency as members of our community, and then offers opportunities for discussion, debate, leadership, and advocacy. Next. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of an introduction to the terms and vocabulary of social studies in Maryland, but I really want to hand it over to our roundtable members. These leaders drive the work of civic learning on the ground. These amazing educators deserve a marching band and not just my quick introduction this afternoon. I am incredibly thankful for them taking the time out of their schedule today. Their expertise and experience will shed light on the state of civic learning in Maryland. There is so much going on in our state that sometimes doesn't get the recognition it deserves. And they're going to share those activities and the work of their students and teachers with you this afternoon. However, as advocates for civic learning, you may also learn some ways that we can further support and expand those opportunities for all students. So we have with us today Monique Ward, and you'll see my little blue stars. You have to have a map of social studies. Monique Ward is our social studies supervisor from Dorchester County. We have with us George Topher, who is the social studies supervisor in Harford County, George Brown, who's the supervisor in Allegany County, and Nicholas Gardiner, who is an elementary educator in Charles County Public Schools, and Marzelle Thomas Smith, who is an elementary educator in Baltimore County Public Schools. And I'm going to be asking them a series of questions to get the conversation going about civic learning in Maryland. And I've crafted those questions. Marissa, if you'll go to the next slide. I've crafted those questions for the roundtable using the 6+4 or 10 proven practices for civic learning. No prerequisite knowledge is needed. I will define each practice as it is referenced in my question. Okay, so let's get to the roundtable members. Great, there you are. Okay, so one of the goals, roundtable members, of the Maryland Civic Education Coalition is to cultivate a collaborative, sustainable culture around civic education. So from your position, what is currently in place in Maryland to support this type of civic culture?
Hi, my name is Nicholas Gardiner, and I am an elementary educator in Charles County. I have had the privilege of working with MSDE on both the framework revision as well as being a part of the elementary lead team, which is rolling this framework out to teachers across the state. And I think that right there is one of the biggest things that's working for civics in Maryland right now. We have teachers from all levels, from all districts across the state that are working on these, collaborating on these frameworks and taking them back to the districts. And we made sure when we were doing that civics was a really big part of our focus as we were creating these. So I think that's one thing that's really working is the work that we're doing right now on creating these frameworks that are up to date, that are inquiry based, that really get kids to think. So I think we're on the right track as a state for sure.
I'm Monique Ward from Dorchester County, and I just kind of want to piggyback off of what Nicholas just said. Here on the Eastern Shore, there's 7 supervisors, and we tend to collaborate and get together at least once a quarter, and then several times during the summer. And we actually look at the frameworks that MSDE has crafted And then we kind of devise our own lessons, and we tend to focus really, really heavy on civics, not just because of the government test, but we know that that's an important standard that all of our students need to be aware of and focused on. So as we're doing our work together as supervisors on the Eastern Shore, we really, really pay attention to that standard of civics to make sure our students have the basic knowledge and foundation.
And to kind of piggyback on what Monique said as well, from an elementary perspective, you know, when I growing up, I thought civics equaled government, but that I don't believe that's necessarily the case. And we can start with these civic ideas in students as early as pre-K and kindergarten, thinking about where they are in their community, what types of roles are important in the community, things like that. And that's something that we can start with very, very early, that then translates over to when you get to focus on the government in, you know, upper elementary, middle, and high school, they've got that kind of baseline of understanding all of those people that make up a civic community and why they're important.
Okay, and I would say in agreement with Nicholas, that's where my thinking was leaning towards, the fact that in Baltimore County, the way curriculum is being pretty much rewritten and adapted is that the whole idea of civics is beginning in the primary grades. And so, you know, the foundation is being laid for that scaffold complexity of civics to be learned by children in the elementary level.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go to another question. So practice one in the proven practices for civic learning is to provide instruction in government, history, law, and democracy. What do you see as the strengths in your district or school for social studies instruction? And then along with that, do you see barriers to this practice in your work?
Hello, I'm George from Allegany County. And I want to say that, you know, once we learned that the 8th grade assessment was going to be a grade band assessment, meaning that, you know, basically what students learn in grades 6, 7, and 8 is going to be critically important, we started to put a very strong emphasis on disciplinary literacy. And each year in grades 6 through 11 for the required social studies courses, we start out each year with a unit on reading, and we start out each year with a unit on writing. Those units are designed in very much the same way, whether it be grade 6 or whether it be grade 11. However, it's progressive. Those units are progressive in nature. In other words, what we expect from students in the 6th grade, which is really initial sourcing of a primary source document and really knowing what a primary source document is. And then, of course, up to grade 11, where we're not only expecting students to source documents and to synthesize information from documents, we also then require them in the 11th grade to make certain that they're able to corroborate, they're able to contextualize information and such. So that's a big, big step. And I guess one of the limitations that I have found with our system is not so much with our new teachers, but it's been a huge paradigm shift for our veteran teachers, learning that, you know, student A might respond differently to primary source documents than student B. And if both provide textual evidence to support their claim, then, you know, by golly, they need to both be given credit for such. So that's all I have. Thank you, Leah.
Hi, everybody. I'm George Topher from Harford County. I would echo what my other friend George said, but I might go a little bit deeper in the sense that in Harford County, what we've done is really focused on skill development alongside with content development. All of us love content, whether we're talking about civic content, geographical content, whatever it may be. but the skill development is really acute in helping students to be prepared for their civic experience as they rise from elementary students into middle and high school students, and then obviously beyond. All of the skills that George mentioned in terms of information, differentiation, and other aspects of that are so important to every aspect of a person's education. And for them to be continuing their education as a member of their community really requires them to use those skills regularly. And so I feel it's really important to emphasize how we work with the skills and what opportunities we provide for students to be able to work with the skills in really real world application. And that can take a lot of different forms. And certainly, I think it isn't just limited to presidential election years, for example. We have to continuously work with students on this to inculcate those values that we think are most important.
And to kind of piggyback off of what they were saying, that idea of inquiry, that idea of primary source documents, that can and does start in the elementary schools. I've been working with my students with primary sources over the past couple of years, and just this year working with the elementary lead team, I created an entire inquiry where I had students walk through several primary sources and analyze what they were saying. One of the barriers, I think, to the idea of teaching government and democracy, particularly nowadays, I think is it's become a really touchy subject, and I think some teachers don't want to touch on it. And so, like, I've had experiences with teachers in my school this year where students who are interested in these ideas and these concepts because of what they might see on TV or what they might see at home or hear at home from their parents, and the teachers kind of sidestep the question, because it might be an uncomfortable question, or in this time period, everybody's really hypersensitive, and so I think one of the things that I can do as a social studies leader in my district is make sure teachers are comfortable talking about those ideas with students, and doing so in a way that isn't offensive, and make sure that all sides are heard.
And just to piggyback off again, what Nicholas just said, as a leader in my district in Dorchester, I noticed this year teachers were not comfortable having those sensitive conversations. I noticed teachers before that didn't have any issues at all and were very comfortable in the past with having those academic discourse and conversations. This year, because of the hypersensitivity of everything going on with civics, some of them were very reluctant and hesitant, especially in a virtual setting. A lot of teachers felt like it was different, obviously, than being physically in a classroom, because when you're virtually, not only do you sometimes have the students there, but you don't realize who your classroom is now opened up to. So there were parents that were listening, and there may have been other folks that were now in the classroom. So teachers that typically were comfortable were a little hesitant. So I tried to continue to have professional development around leading teachers how to have those conversations about civics and everything going on with the government, and just trying to have them kind of lead them through what those academic conversations should sound like, not just for teachers, but for students. Because as you know, sometimes when you have those sensitive conversations, students can lead you down a rabbit hole real quick, and teachers aren't always sophisticated enough to be able to continue that conversation. So to me, that's been one of the barriers that we've noticed this year with the virtual type teaching and learning.
Leah, actually, before you move on, I just want to throw in there to kind of end up what everyone has just said. Not only do I agree with them on what they see as a barrier in terms of those, what do we call them? Courageous conversations and sensitive conversations, but I'm actually experiencing right now really realizing that there are some of our colleagues, unfortunately, they're not having these conversations because the lens of diversity and the true heart that it takes to be open to other individuals, they don't possess. So, I'm seeing conversations kind of get swept under the rug, and they are covering it with, I don't really feel comfortable, but you don't feel comfortable because it's not what you as a human being believe. And like I said, I'm actually in a circumstance where this is being revealed to me with somebody that I work with, and it's kind of devastating.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, Marzelle, but I also really appreciate you sharing that with our group, because that is most certainly a barrier. So thank you. My next question was about discussion of current and local and national events, but maybe we'll come back to that one at the end, because it sounds like you all have kind of already touched on that one a little bit. Practice number 4 in the proven practices for civic learning is to offer extracurricular activities that provide opportunities for young people to become involved in their schools and communities. What do you see as the strengths in your district or school for offering extracurricular activities? Mock trial, World Kappa, National History Day, We the People, and others. And what do you see as barriers?
I'll go ahead and start out. In Allegany County, we are very, very proud of Allegany High School, which is a 1A school in Maryland, and which has won the state mock trial competition in 2009 and 2018. The school has been a finalist multiple times, and I'm happy to say, and please forgive me, but just last week beat DeMatha Catholic School. And keeping in mind that in state mock trial competitions, you basically, have the smallest schools competing against the largest schools in the state of Maryland. So we're very happy about that. And all 4 of our schools, high schools in Allegany County, have a mock trial program, and all of them have been challenged by Allegany to improve, which is a good thing. Also, we very much have, we recently started a Rho Kappa chapter at Fort Hill High School, and it's actually in honor of a gentleman by the name of Floyd Wigfield, who graduated in the first class of Fort Hill. He is now 106 years old. He's a World War II veteran. He still drives, believe it or not. But so there's some history there, even with the naming the Rho Kappa organization at Fort Hill after him. And we also have a very active National History Day competition. We have basically included a requirement within our honors programs for students to complete a National History Day presentation. And over the past few years, we've had some state champions. So we would like to think that we're providing multiple opportunities for our students in Allegany County as extracurricular activities. And I just want to put a plug in too for our historical research methods classes at our high schools. And at Mountain Ridge High School over the past couple of years, I guess it was in 2017 or 2018, they did a huge presentation, a documentary on fake news and trying to determine what's fake, what's real, and such. And then last year, we had our last smokestack industry in Allegany County close. It was the paper mill. And so they did a documentary on looking at the economic and social impact of the closing of that paper mill. It was one of the biggest employers in Allegany County. And also, I just want to say that Fort Hill High School a few years ago did a documentary on the opioid epidemic here. So that's really inquiry-based learning. And so we have a lot of positive things going on here. The only thing I wish is that more students would take advantage. It seems like only the college-bound students are taking advantage of these opportunities. So with that being said, I'll pass it on to one of my colleagues.
So here in Dorchester, for the last 3 years, our students in middle and high school have been a part of the National History Day. And George is exactly correct. It just feels like this opportunity is kind of limited, or a barrier is that most of our students that tend to do the projects and get involved and do the research are our honor students. And my goal this year, had we not been virtual and in this pandemic, was to actually try to seek out students that aren't necessarily at the top of the academic list and kind of provide that support for them so that they could see some success and actually digging in and doing the projects. So that's my goal, is to kind of provide that support so that it's just not the honor students. They're used to doing the research and going to the competitions, but I'm trying to look and focus on our other students who sometimes are academically challenged. They can do the projects. I just got to make sure that we provide that support for them moving forward so that we have more a diversity in our students that actually are a part of the local competition. So we have the local competition. It's held at Salisbury University at one of our local colleges. And then we've had our students actually do projects and make it to the national level. And our district has only been involved with National History Day for 3 years. So we're really, really excited. And the momentum across the district is really growing. Like George has mentioned in his district, it's part of the honors program, and that's what we're looking to add to our curriculum so that it's kind of requirement for the honor students. So that way we can advance the number of students that actually participate in National History Day. So that's our goal here in Dorchester.
And that's
Down here-
awesome.
down here-
I love hearing about the good work that's happening. But I do want to follow up just for a minute on what I'm hearing, because it sounds like both of you are in agreement that it's not available to all students. So what might further support expanding that opportunity? What do you think standing in the way right now? And that can be to any of the roundtable members.
Well,
Yeah, I'm gonna say, what I think just jumps out at me is teach social studies. Teach social studies from the ground level in our schoolhouses, Nick and I as elementary folks, and create that natural, tap into the natural curiosity of children, just like we do for science. Teach it from the ground up, and then it doesn't make it so novel as they get older. One of the other things, and I don't know if this has anything to do with anything, but what I have found from years ago, even in terms of content area, teachers and administrators and systems are so bent on the testing. And the testing involves math and reading. And so they forget the continuum or the flow that can occur when things like civics and economics and geography and social studies are integrated into those subjects. So I guess what I'm saying is teach the doggone social studies, period.
And to kind of add on to what Marzelle said, I think we need to take advantage of the fact that we live in this hypersensitive world where kids are interested in hearing about things in the news and hearing about things from their parents. And so it's kind of all connected. The idea of, you know, the students hearing something on the news or hearing something from their parents and coming into class and asking their teacher, that teacher choosing not to sidestep that question and addressing that might feed into that love of civics or social studies that student might develop because they're now interested in something they've seen or heard on TV or on the news. So I think we need to take advantage of the fact that we live in a world that, you know, maybe isn't necessarily the best time in our democracy, but it lends itself to opportunities for even the youngest students to become interested in some of these things. Another thing I think that's worth mentioning is we need to, you know, one of the barriers of these opportunities in schools I found is that teachers already feel like they're stretched so thin. Who's going to sponsor these activities? Who's going to sponsor these, you know, these clubs or these, you know, this mock trial team at the school level? I found that you know, maybe we need to incentivize these somehow and really get teachers on board and get teachers excited about these clubs and these ideas, and then have that trickle down to the students. Or in the reverse, you know, the student becomes interested and it becomes a teacher who piques that interest and says, okay, maybe we could start a club or something like that here at our school. Even at the elementary level, things like student councils. I know we'll get into that stuff in one of the future questions, but that can be the start of something great for a child when it comes to civics and social studies.
I think another important aspect to this is the understanding that one of the big barriers is that there's just not enough of us to go around. I mean, I manage a K-12 program, as a singleton with one resource support person. There just simply isn't a way to be able to provide all those opportunities and to work on marshaling those resources. So one of the things that I've had to do is form some partnerships with some outside community members who are interested in working with us and partnering with us on civics. So a great example for us has been our bar association. I mean, they have been terrific in helping us with mock trial. When I first became supervisor, we had 2 mock trial teams. We now are up to 12. Okay, it's because they were willing to get involved as coaches, to be part of the performances that students are engaged with. So, you know, establishing that partnership with them. The League of Women Voters has been terrific in Harford County. Outreach to help us register kids to vote and to be available to seniors as they're transitioning out into the larger community. They've been a great partner in supporting us in terms of that work. So I think that we also have to realize our own limitations in terms of what we can do, but that there are a lot of partners out there that if we can give them some direction and focus, will be more than glad to help us with that outreach, especially when it comes to trying to help kids with civic engagement and civic understanding.
Let me just add really quickly, George, and I think you hit on something there as far as the Bar Association. Our Allegany High School team has had, and actually all of our high school teams have had some attorneys, local attorneys who have really stepped up and helped with the mock trial competitions and advising students and such. At the same time, we can grow opportunities. And what we've seen at Allegany, Brian White has been the coach at Allegany for 27 years. And he now has former mock trial participants who are attorneys now who are actually working with his team. And then they're able to support 2 full teams each year. And once again, that's from a high school of 650 students. So, all of these things, I think, we need to look at the opportunities to grow. And as George mentioned, the being willing to collaborate with those folks who are so willing to help, but sometimes we don't ask for them to help.
Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate both the work that you've been able to do with those partnerships, but also the recognition that it requires an individual in your system to be available to build those partnerships. So let's move on to practice number 5. Practice number 5 is to encourage student participation in school governance. And similarly, practice 6 is to encourage students' participation in simulations of democratic processes and procedures. So trying on democracy, playing it out, playing the role. What do you see as the strengths in your district or school for encouraging programs like student government associations? And what do you see as the barriers to that practice?
Well, down here in Charles County, all of the high schools do have student government associations. But I think, and I'm coming from an elementary perspective, so I'm always going to kind of go to that. I've taught in 4 different schools in Charles County over my time here, and only one of the 4 schools has had any form of a student council in elementary school. And I really do think it does need to start there. I think one of the things that we need to see more of in elementary and even middle and high schools is that idea of student voice, giving students power to speak and to have their opinions heard and matter. Our superintendent in Charles County has an advisory council, and before the pandemic, she would go around to the different schools, and we as teachers would select certain students to go and meet with the superintendent so she could hear directly from the students what was working and what wasn't in terms of their schools. And I thought that was really powerful for some of those students to be able to speak to the person that is in charge of the school system and really feel like they're having their voice heard. I think sometimes as adults, we're the biggest barrier to that. I think sometimes, we think we know best, and in many cases we do, but for example, in Charles County, we have a student member of the Board of Education, and he's been pushing for student voting rights for himself on the board, not in all situations, but in certain situations. And he's gotten a lot of pushback from a lot of adults. I don't have an opinion one way or the other necessarily, but I found it odd and interesting that he would receive pushback for trying to advocate for students and for student voice. So, but I think we're on the right track. But I think students in elementary and middle schools need more opportunities to have their voices heard in that democratic process as well.
Here in Dorchester, I totally agree with Nicholas. One of the barriers, or what I see as an issue here in Dorchester, is we don't have that student voice for SGAs at the elementary level. We do have our SGAs, student governments, at middle school level and at the high school, and they meet individually at the school. They have their own activities, and then they come together every quarter across the district at the secondary level, but we have never reached down and involved elementary students at all. So we don't have that voice at the elementary school. And so to me, that's a barrier because it just seems like it's not as important at the elementary level. Social studies then doesn't have that voice as much as they do at the secondary level when it comes to student government associations. So we have it at the middle school and high school, but we do not have it at all at the elementary level.
And actually, I'm going to venture out to say that on the elementary level, in Baltimore County, we have this thing called the EDA, the extra duty activities. And I'm thinking that student government, that type of club, if you will, because that's the label that it comes under, is included. But I believe that what teachers would be paid on the elementary level is so much less than what secondary teachers may be getting paid. Well, I'm certain that it is. And so therefore, there's elementary folks that are, unless they can really figure out how to word it and make it this higher level type of qualifier, because there's different tiers of how you could be paid for extra duty activity. I think that's one of the reasons why, that does not, this whole student government idea does not push forward. And again, I'm going to also say that if in our system, we don't really see social studies as a very important content area to move forward, then we fail to see the outliers or the outlets that something like a student government could help to promote social studies learning and create that lifelong citizen that we, are talking about here.
I'll go back to a couple of points that were raised by my colleagues, and that really comes down to the curriculum. In our elementary curriculum, one of the things that we do is encourage kids to hold a classroom meeting where they discuss what the issues of importance are at their school, and to take that to their principal for discussion, and to invite the principal to come to class and talk with the students about those things that students think are critical. I think that, again, we have some opportunities through the curriculum that it doesn't have to be an additional part of what teachers are asked to do. It could be something that is really fundamentally just part of the experience in civics that students have beginning in elementary, with an understanding that as they grow, that there are organizations that they can join at their school that can provide that kind of civic leadership within the four walls where they are so much of their day regularly, and that they can see how democracy works, as well as what kinds of jobs are out there that are associated with those kinds of skills. We talk about the idea of career education, and sometimes we, overemphasize some of the ideas associated, say, with science and STEM, and forget that what we really need are people who can manage their emotions, who can handle their business in a way that is productive and realistic, who can collaborate and be team players. Those are all the things that we teach kids. So, that reality, I think, is something that we should not lose sight of, and that it's such an opportunity that if we can construct it in a way that provides kids with those experiences, we're providing them with such a service that's going to be so valuable down the road.
And
You know what, Leah,
providing
let me
that-
just throw this in final. One thing that I want to say, so in Baltimore County, I would be remiss if I did not mention that it's a blessing that we have the social studies coordinator, Michael Crispins, that we have, because Mike is thinking along the same lines as George is talking about here in terms of infusing his curriculum with all of that, the civics, the simulations, the inquiry, the diversity. So I do have to say, you know, while these are things that could be barriers, I think in Baltimore County, most definitely, our social studies leadership has us on that path to be able to make what George is saying happen in terms of curriculum.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, at the same time that you're doing that, you're providing students the opportunity to build their background knowledge, which is what we know from whether it's Robert Manzano or Nell Duke or other literacy experts that will increase reading ability and writing ability. So it's about social studies, but it's also about the whole child in the elementary program. So we're at 4:25. So you've been sending our host some questions that you would like to ask the panelists. While the host is coordinating those for us, I'm going to give the panel one last question, and that is, if money were no issue, imagine that world, money's no issue in education. And what would be the first thing you would do to improve social studies education in Maryland?
I honestly think that you have to start back in the primary grades. And literacy is so critical. So I want to go back, just start there, that, you know, we need to make certain that our primary grade students are able to be relatively as literate as possible by the time that they get to, you know, second and third grade. But with that being said, I also am a firm believer that, you know, and actually I just put this in our budget today as we prepare for fiscal year 2022. And that is that I would love to have a disciplinary literacy coach for, you know, our middle schools and for our high schools, because we certainly have some folks in our system who are just outstanding with disciplinary literacy, but we also have some folks who are somewhat limited as to, you know, their skill level in teaching disciplinary literacy within the social studies. So, you know, I would certainly welcome the opportunity to have disciplinary literacy coaches specifically for our social studies teachers.
I think from a teaching perspective, or from somebody who's you know, in a school and just very recently in a classroom, you know, and I'm going to brag on the elementary lead team that I'm on. I think we need much more of that. I think we need opportunities for teachers to collaborate with each other when it comes to things like social studies and civics. I think we need opportunities for teachers to, you know, collaborate with people like Leah at MSDE, who does such a great job of making sure that we as teachers are a part of the process. And we as teachers are, you know, when those frameworks come out and when that curriculum comes out, you know, I'm going to be able to go to teachers as part of that elementary lead team and say, you know, there were teachers involved in creating this. You know, we created this with the mind that, you know, it was going to work for students right now. And I think that the more opportunities we can provide for teachers rather to do that in collaboration with each other and in collaboration with those above them, I think that's one of the things that kind of gets social studies and kind of puts it on the same level as the tested subjects.
So Leah and everyone, what I'm thinking, I mean, the question was about money. If money was no issue and given no pandemic and no, you know, people with malevolent ideas in the world, I would be a staunch organizer of field trips. I would spend money so that children and teachers can actually um, see in the museums the primary sources, touch, some of the historic tools and things that people, it would be about field tripping. Like I have this, I was teasing, with our coordinator about the fact that I thought that, he should create a little job in his office since there's only one resource teacher, and come let me be all about field trips. Being like a liaison to coordinate, to seek them. And, we were just laughing, maybe 10 years from now, which of course I will be gone. But, for me, it would be resources and the opportunity for teachers and children to get out and see what it is we're talking about.
I would have two things that I would really, really want. The first one would be small class sizes across the board. This way, we're not allowing kids to hide, and we're asking them and inviting them to be part of the process. In too many cases, our class sizes are so large that we miss kids. And our kids who are silent, our kids who are shy, don't get those opportunities. And they need them because they're going to be our leaders of tomorrow. So why shouldn't every kid be expected as well as encouraged to have that experience? So small class sizes so that every kid can participate. The second thing, and I know this won't be popular, and that's okay because I'm getting to the point I'm not really caring anymore. Every teacher has to have a political science or civics course in their background. There are far too many elementary teachers who have no political science or civics background other than what they may have learned in their K-12 experience. The other piece of that puzzle that we don't want to talk about is at the secondary level. I can tell you now, I have, out of all of my government teachers, 2 of them who have political science degrees. Almost all of them are history trained, which means more often than not, they have very little background in political science and the understanding of civics. So I would encourage the fact that I think every teacher, the same way that we do with special education, needs a civics and political science course in order to prepare themselves to teach children at any level.
So thank you. And you probably couldn't see as you were speaking, all of you, the snaps and the agreements that you were getting from the interactivity cards. So I think your message is resonating with people. And I noticed on our participant list that both of my predecessors in my position are with us here today. And through both of their work, similar conversations have taken place. And there's some commonality in what's happened in Maryland, and to hear the needs and the desires for civic learning, some are remaining consistent. And so that actually gives me a lot of hope, because we know what those barriers are. We just need to find ways to remove them. And at the same time, because of the work of my 2 predecessors, we have one of the best programs in the nation that we can be very proud of what Maryland is doing in terms of social studies education, but we just don't want to stop there. We want to take it to the next level and improve it for all of our students. So at this time, I've been asked to sort of lead some questions from the group, and then also sort of summarize what we've learned so far. And a lot of the questions that came in, I was looking over them, are ones that you all have answered. And so I think I'll let them continue those conversations in the small group breakouts. And if you're able to join them in those breakouts, if you are, maybe address them at that time. But here are some things that I heard, that we have an equity issue, that students are doing amazing things, but not all students have the opportunity. And there are a variety of factors that influence whether or not those students are getting those opportunities. I also heard a lot of conversation about resources, that it may be a financial barrier, but it may not be. The resource of who you have as a teacher in terms of their pre-service programming and what it provided for them, but then also just simply the money to pay for the bus to go on a field trip. So resources and providing equal access to those resources across subject areas so that they're not being prioritized in other areas and not for social studies. I also heard that some really great things are happening in terms of collaboration that Monique mentioned about her work on the Eastern Shore. And I know the same is true in the West, that folks are working together to solve these problems and to build partnerships. So we heard from George about the partnerships that he's been able to build with the associated groups. And so I just want to, we also have a lot of those folks with us here today. So big shout out to our groups who are helping us in this work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think this conversation proves that we're eager to continue to work with you and to support one another. And then ultimately I heard a lot of talk about elementary. And I know we have 2 elementary educators with us here today, but our supervisors also pulled into the importance of that as well. That's one of those commonalities that we've seen across time, that the marginalization of elementary social studies has remained consistent, and the negative outcomes of that have remained consistent as well. And so perhaps maybe as we speak in our small groups, we can talk about ways that we could address that. I am at 4:36. So at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to my roundtable, because I hate that feeling when you leave a conversation and you're like, but there was that one last thing I needed to say. So if you've got that one last thing you really need to say, roundtable, now's your chance. You've got 2 minutes to give that one last thing that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance.
I just think that forums like this are exactly what we need as a state to continue the conversation. The more we're willing to meet and talk about what we need to do and where we need to go, the better off our social studies program in the state of Maryland is going to be. And given our proximity to the capital of our country, and the number of kids and parents who may in some way be involved in our national government, I think that's a great thing for our state. And so kudos to the people that put this together and that have had us today. I think conversation and collaboration is definitely the best part, and it's the way forward.
Thank you, Nick. All right, I'm going to set you up for your next experience here. But before I do that, I just need to say thank you again to our roundtable participants. So please share your appreciation in the chat box for them. Early in this pandemic, I referred to educators and teachers and supervisors and all folks working in education for social studies as heroes. And it felt right at the time. And then I later realized that that's really actually undermining the professionalism and courage that these people have had this last year. Unlike any other subject area, the people that you are looking at right now are unbelievable professionals with the courage to help teachers and students confront social unrest, contested elections, virtual learning. And I just want to thank you. And words don't express the appreciation enough, but thank you. And to all of the educators who are here with us today, my same level of appreciation goes out to you. So when you get into your breakout groups, you're going to have these discussion questions. And so these 3 can frame your discussion. At that time, just as a few reminders, you want to pick a note taker who's going to use a link to take some notes on a shared format. Keep in mind that all ideas are welcome, that you're there to seek to understand issues better and to one another better. Be aware of how much space you take up. Everyone wants to hear your ideas, but they want to hear everyone's ideas. Speak from your own experience and invite others to share if you notice that folks are hesitant to jump in. And use your interaction cards. You guys have been doing a fun job with that in our session. I appreciate that. It's been fun to see that. So thank you so much for all that you're doing and whatever role you play in social studies education. Thank you. And we look forward to working with you in the days ahead. Oh, one last thing. See, I told you, there's always one last thing that I wanted to say. That was somebody asked information about the type of assessments early on, and I just want to put that in the chat box. In this link, you will not only find the assessments, but all of our frameworks. So if you want to know what do you teach in social studies in Maryland, this is your go-to spot. You can look at all the different state frameworks. Now you know what I mean when I say that. So go get into those state frameworks and check them out. You can see what we're doing here in Maryland. And again, keep in mind that's the floor of expectation. If you want to know what's happening in your own local school system, reach out to your local school system and look into their curriculum. Okay, thanks so much.